Further debate. I recognize a member from Ottawa, Vanier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I first want to say our humble
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
to the member from Kiwitinook. It's been a great honor to listen to your speech, sir. And I just want to say, I wanted to, even before I heard you, I wanted to acknowledge that we are an Indigenous territory and how important it is for all of us legislators to continue to recognize this, because we all are part of reconciliation efforts, and if we don't do it, it speaks to their lack of commitment to this. So I think it was unfortunate that the speech for the throne did not do that, and I hope that there is a lesson in this for all of us as we move forward. I had entitled my intervention this afternoon as Words of Caution. And I will speak a little bit from the perspective of the portfolios that I have the honour to hold in the Liberal caucus, and present a bit of a legal analysis, so a justice and community safety analysis, women's issue perspective, and finally an environment and conservation perspective. And I will do so with the background that I have, the baggage that I have, which is a human rights background. And so therefore, you will forgive me to start a little bit on the issue of justice and community safety by referring to a story about the 20th anniversary of the Charter. At that time, I was president of the Law Commission of Canada, and we had organized a panel on policing and the Charter. We were trying to acknowledge or decipher whether indeed policing had changed with the Charter and what had been the impact. So the first speaker was the Chief of Police for Peel Region at the time, and he started his speech in the following way. He said, "When the Charter came in, I was very worried about policing. I was worried that the Charter was going to undermine policing. I was worried about the impact that it would have on the way in which I was carrying my work." But he said, and he concluded with the following terms: after 20 years, he thought respecting the Charter had enhanced policing, that respecting the Charter had been good for policing, that it had ensured that the right people were being charged and the right people were found guilty. So his commitment to the Charter was unwavering. And indeed, I think there's words of caution and words that I want to share. I wanted to share this story with the government members, because I think we want to make sure that we continue to observe the Charter. And I know that it's a commitment that we all share, but we have to be careful in proceeding, as they have indicated, to pause the implementation of Bill 175 with the rationale that it fails the frontline officers. Just want to remind you that Bill 175 aimed to modernize policing, and it was to implement the oversight measures that Justice Tulloch had suggested, and it looked really at the current best practices around the world on community policing and also on oversight. So my words is to caution us and caution the government a little bit about the language that it has used in describing this fight. I've been here obviously for the whole week and listened to question period every day, and I'm worried about the language that comes and says that on one side there are the pro-police, and anyone that advocates for oversight is anti-police. I think we're all in this together. We need to ensure that we have good policing. Everybody's for justice. We know that the vast majority of police officers do a fabulous job, and we rely on them and we thank them for all the work that they do. And we need to ensure that we continue to have policing that is rooted in anti-discrimination, that is rooted in a respect for the Charter, and that continues to be a policing that we're for. Being oversight, wanting to ensure good oversight, which is necessary for good policing, is not to undermine policing work, is to support it, is to honour it. When you say that you want the policing to be as good as they should be, I think it's to honour the profession and their professionalism and the fairness that most of the time they demonstrate. So Charter compliance enhances the confidence of the public, and I think police know that they need the cooperation of the community to resolve crimes. People, witnesses, and victims alike must feel confident in the professionalism and the fairness of the police. And I think I want to continue to be part of a legislature that recognizes that this is fundamental to the good functioning of our society. I also want to so I caution ourselves against polarizing debates, essentially, because I don't think that's going to be helpful to the future of policing and the future of community safety, particularly in a time where there are some big issues of safety throughout the province. There were very few words in the speech of the Trône that were dedicated to other issues of justice, access to justice. Mais j'espère que la nouvelle procureure générale
I hope so that the Attorney General will make public a plan when she talks more about it.
On women's issue. And again, I'm going to speak from the position of having been at this House only for 18 months before being re-elected. And I worked with people from across the aisle on many issues that were dear to my heart, women's issues. And indeed, I think I work on human trafficking, you know, the modern slavery that we have. And I worked with the MPP for Kawartha Lakes, Brock, who's now the Minister of Labour, and also the MPP for London West. And we work across the aisle on this file, recognizing how important it was to act in a coordinated fashion to prevent human trafficking. And one of the essential elements of this was education as being a strong tool for prevention. In addition, lots of the good work that we've done to continue to prevent violence against women spoke again to education. So this is where we were at the end of the 41st Parliament. How do we prevent human trafficking? Education of young people on the risk of being lured on the internet. How to prevent and reduce violence against women. Education of young men and young women on the right to say no and the duty to respect a no. How important it was to make sure that there was consent all the time on any form of sexual touching. I have to say myself, my background was in working on childhood sexual violence in many years, and I know that it requires children to be able to speak, to know, and to name what's happening to their bodies. And it's very important if we want to empower young people to come forward, that they have the ability to speak and to speak powerfully and name what's happening to them. I also know that on the other files that we work across the aisles, you know, how do we prevent suicide by young LGBTQ teens? By education and by acceptance of, and the creation of equal and inclusive school environment. How do we prevent bullying? Again, by education. A human rights analysis of the removal of the LGBTQ language from the curriculum is itself worrisome, because to me it speaks that this might be discrimination in itself. So I'm surprised that after all this work that we did across the aisles, that we are now faced with the repeal of the health and sexual education curriculum. So I just want to maybe the government to analyze this in light of other promises. The women's focus, the health of LGBTQ must be taken into account, and I think I'd be honored to continue this discussion about what's the best way to move forward. Now, on the environment, I think I want to say a couple of things about the cancellation of the tax on polluters that cap and trade is. First of all, we haven't understood from the government the full cost of the way in which they are proceeding. There were rules about participating in the Western Climate Initiatives, and these rules are not being respected. So I'm going to refer to some of the lawyers that are putting things on the internet. Erden Berlis had this to say: much uncertainty remains about how to cancel this program that was linked to cap-and-trade programs in Quebec and California. Many former participants in the cap-and-trade program have concerns with how the government will reimburse the substantial amount of money that had been invested in emissions allowance credit. And I worry I worry as a legal scholar, as a lawyer, about the climate of uncertainty and the inability to honor contracts. This is part of the rule of law. The rule of law is about the government's not using its capacity to legislate to actually discriminate against or undermine the rights of individuals or the rights even of corporations. So I worry that the way in which cap-and-trade was eliminated without fully complying with all the rules, and the way in which many of the contracts on renewable energies have been evacuated without, again, looking at the way in which the cost that will come to the taxpayer and the respect for the contracts. Indeed, I think you should know that the Ontario Water Power Association is complaining that indeed many of these contracts created good jobs in different areas of the province, and they will be undermined. So I think it's worth noting that in the job of governing, you may have good ideas, but if you have to go with caution so that you don't affect detrimentally a large number of people. And those are the words that I'm trying to utter today to ensure that this is well recognized. I have to say, I am concerned about the way in which the government is planning to limit the amount of compensation that will be available through regulation. This isn't part of the Bill number 2, and that does not allow for much transparency, and I think could have a negative impact on the climate for investment in Ontario. You cannot be open for business if you're going to tell businesses at any time the government can decide to eradicate your contracts, walk away, and limit the compensation to which that's going to be available to you. That's dangerous. It's dangerous for jobs, is dangerous for investments, is dangerous also for our commitment to the rule of law. So those are the things that actually worry me when I heard about the speech of the trône and many, beside also all the things that were not mentioned, that I've mentioned in my statement yesterday about the lack of recognition, the lack of commitment on Indigenous reconciliation, the lack of word in French, the lack of recognition of the importance of the francophone community in Ontario. C'était un peu démoralisant.
It's a bit discouraging.
Of a commitment on housing, which is a key aspect of the things that I've heard in my own riding of Ottawa-Vanier. So I continue to look forward to this debate, and I urge the government to consider some of the points that were made in this debate. Formerly, when I was on the other side, the Conservative would also always say, good ideas come from all sides, you know, and not only from the government side. And I hope that now that they're in government, they will continue to abide by this motto. Et il faut faire attention. That's true. Well, I have lots of new ideas. Count on me. You know, I think il faut faire attention.
I think we have to be careful. We have to be transparent. New governments have to start to govern.
It's important to go forward. I just urge that we do not create worse and bad outcomes for Ontarians around. I think the job of governing is to look at the interest of all Ontarians in moving forward, and I urge this government to continue to do that and do it with ensuring that people know what's going to happen. I would finally urge the government to publish the letters of mandate for the different ministers so that actually we know what was not on the speech of the trône and that we know what's going to happen to Ontarians for the next little while. Merci beaucoup, Miigwech.
Merci. Thank you very much.